I've got a man named Keith Cheeseman, lives in exile in Turkey, and he robbed the Bank of England. Are you interested? I said, yes, very interested.
Now, though, in 1990, a bank courier strode out of the Bank of England and minutes later was robbed at knifepoint of bonds valued at £292 million, the biggest theft in British history. But the thing is, when Keith Cheeseman got a call to attend a meeting on the night of the robbery, he counted £427 million in bonds. That's £135 million more than the Bank of England had reported. Over the next 18 months, 2 gangland figures were shot dead and more than 80 people were arrested. Keith, who tried to launder the bonds, was later jailed. Well, there's a new book all about this called How to Rob the Bank of England. Keith Cheeseman reveals the true story of Britain's biggest ever robbery. I'm joined by the author, Clifford Thurlow, and by Keith Cheeseman himself. Gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to Times Radio.
Good afternoon.
Thank you.
I mean, what a topic for a story, for a book, a true story that you have brought to life, Clifford. What made you want to tell this story now?
Oh, these stories come up once in a lifetime for a writer. I've done lots of books. And then when my agent, Andrew Loney, came to me and said, I've got a man named Keith Cheeseman, lives in exile in Turkey, and he robbed the Bank of England. Are you interested? I said, yes, very interested. I spoke to Keith a couple of days later on the phone, and we've had a relationship over the last 12 months, him telling the story. We've spoken on Skype, and it is just a fantastic story because it's all about, really, the missing £135 million that no one knows where it went except Keith Cheeseman.
And that's the crucial point, and we'll come on to that in just a moment. Keith, I'll bring you in very shortly. Clifford.
I'm not saying anything.
Sum up Keith for me. Describe Keith as a fellow.
Keith is a bank robber. He's robbed lots of banks, but he's a man who abhors violence, and he robs banks with a fountain pen, not with a machine gun. And he was very successful at it. He is the most generous man I've ever met in my life. And as he said himself, he robbed banks because the banks always rob the little people. I said to him, Lord, like us? And he said, well, you speak for yourself, son. And so it's been a pleasure. And also, when you really enjoy working with somebody, it makes the writing that much easier. It just kind of comes. And it's just an amazing story. Over the 18 months before Keith was arrested, 2 gangland figures were shot dead, both 2 taps in the head. That was, it showed how this was big time. Most of the people who were arrested were let go. The British establishment never wanted these people to come to court because in open court they would have told the whole story. That's why I think the British government were very happy when Keith was extradited to the United States, where he ended up getting 6-year prison sentence and out in just under 4. And he's sat on this story really for the last 30 years of actually who was behind this theft, where the missing money went, and that's what we reveal in the book for the first time.
Well, I think we need to hear from the man himself. I mean, Keith, why did you want to tell what is your story now?
A good question. Can I answer it? I did feel very aggrieved that people could get away with the way it was done. And when I was arrested at my penthouse in the Barbican, I was taken to Bishopsgate Police Station, and they said there, we're not arresting you, the Americans are arresting you. So we're not charging you. They had nothing on me at all in England, which I felt was peculiar. And America took me off. Well, that's why I ran away, really, because the Americans. I think everybody runs away from Americans, especially now with Trump. Anyway, but it just felt wrong to me that there was something wrong. And of course, later, only when Clifford contacted me did I investigate exactly what had gone on, because I was quite convinced everybody knew what they were doing and what we were all doing, but it wasn't like that, you know.
So did you feel almost like you were the fall guy?
Fall guy, rather
You were the
than
fall guy because you were involved in it.
Oh yes.
You laundered the money.
Yes.
But you were the only person, or there are reports
Well,
you were the only person who ever got held
exactly.
accountable. Yeah.
And then you find out that MI6, MI5, the police, and everybody else is involved. And as you so rightly said, I was the only one who got sentenced for it.
Which brings us on to this disparity between the official figure
Yeah.
that was talked about at the time, which was £292 million worth
Yeah.
of bearer bonds being stolen, which, I mean, itself is an extraordinary sum of money. That is the biggest theft in British history. But Clifford, you say that actually the real number is 427 million in bonds, and that's because, Keith, you counted that money. So what do you think explains the disparity?
Well, again, discussing it with Clifford and thinking about it over the years, it had to go somewhere. And Clifford very cleverly mentioned Colonel North. Bearer bonds are things, they're cash. All this business about you can't spend them and all that, that's wrong, because it says on them, we promise to pay the bearer. You don't have to have a name on them. So that's why they're used as collateral and everything else. So they disappeared somewhere. And governments and people who shouldn't be transferring that sorts of money obviously can use them for that reason. And that's obviously where the rest of the money was going, somewhere that it was aligned to go somewhere by somebody from either the bank or the government or the treasury, as we say. So it had to go somewhere. And then, ironically enough, later when the lawyer Grass MI6 agent was held in Cyprus, the magistrate there said to the police, I think, can you prove these are stolen? And and he got away. He was given bail and went off. So none of it was proven how much there was taken. They printed all the figures of the bonds, but it meant nothing, really.
So, Clifford, have you been able to get to the bottom of this in the book?
I think we have.
Yes, I lent him 100 million.
Actually, it was only 19. So I think we have got to the bottom of this. The reason why the book's called How to Rob the Bank of England is, if you want to rob the Bank of England, you have to be inside the Bank of England.
Yes.
And
Okay.
so who and why and how exactly, well, I'm not going to tell you.
We'll have to read the book.
Exactly, you have to read the book. But indeed, we do get to the bottom of it, and we do reveal the secrets that have been kept really since 1990 by the British establishment.
And as I say, you know, it is a compelling story, kind of in the tradition of the other notorious robberies in British history. You think of the Brinksmat robbery, you think of the Great Train robbery. My immediate thought when I was reading about this was, I mean, this may sound weird, but about the movie Die Hard, because the plot in that is they're stealing bearer bonds.
We mentioned Die Hard.
Yeah.
Keith went to see the movie Die Hard in Leicester Square when he lived in London at the penthouse at the Barbican, and I think you probably learned about bearer bonds from that film, didn't you, Keith? Or
Well,
you
it
knew
helped.
already?
It helped.
It helped.
You don't see yourself as a bit of a Hans Gruber, then, Keith. No.
I'll leave that to Clifford.
Yeah. Just tell me a little bit, Keith, about kind of how you view what you did as a kind of career, if I can put it that way. Because, you know, there'll be a lot of people who say, okay, you may consider yourself to be more of a kind of old-time gentleman gangster, as it were, but you were still involved in some pretty nefarious activities. How does that sit with you now?
Well, yes. I'm ashamed of some of the things I've done. But again, you know, I had my options where I could become a bank robber or a radio interviewer. And I thought
Touché,
I
very
want
good, very
I want
good.
the one with prospects.
Let me tell you, there's probably more money being a bank robber. Clifford, I mean, this, as you say, is such a fascinating story, and you think you've gotten to the bottom of it. Have you had any pushback from kind of the authorities as you've been doing this investigating?
Not yet.
Okay.
I think they will probably start after this recording. You asked me earlier.
And arrest him when he leaves the building.
The building, and waiting outside. It's hard enough to get in the building. You asked what kind of man is Keith?
Yeah.
I think Keith was in prison in various places, but was always able to make friends with everyone. He used to have his food delivered from Harrods and that kind of thing. And once he was playing chess, there's not much else to do in prison, with the famous Frankie Fraser, the big-time gangster he was the assassin for the Cray twins. They were playing chess, and Frankie was a bit slow, but Keith said to Frankie, I suppose you're going to kill me if I win this game. And Frankie Fraser said, you bet your life I will. And Keith said, thank God for that. I can't stand the food in here. So for the first time in his life, Frankie Fraser laughed, and Keith now was protected inside the jail. So that's the kind of man that Keith is. So he would be friends with the warders, always polite, always a gentleman. And I think, I said earlier, but he robbed banks because the banks rob us. And so that was his kind of modus operandi, or way of thinking.
Keith,
it's a little bit more complicated than that. I had a very successful building company in the West Midlands, and I had 7 million quid's worth of building going on, and suddenly one weekend the banks foreclosed our overdraft, which absolutely destroyed the business. There was nothing, the amount of money that we'd outlaid, there was nothing else I could do. So that set me on the path, because the bank manager couldn't explain why. It was just a across the board, building is bad news now, we're closing the overdraft. But my building was actually government building. It was council houses in Birmingham and Southwark and places like that. And so the money was safe, and yet they just foreclosed. And that really set me off. I thought, that's wrong.
And do you really see that way? Because, when you say, for example, Clifford, that, we rob the banks because the banks rob us. Is that really true? I know people will have their issues with the way that certain banks have behaved over the decades, but these banks, they're holding people's money, ordinary people's money. When a bank is robbed, it's ordinary people's money that's being robbed, is it not?
But the bank is responsible. Remember that anybody, they're guaranteed up to, I think, 80,000 to get back if it's robbed. But they also, remember, my attitude towards it is, you go to a cash card, you've got to pay to get your own cash out. The bank should be paying the tellers. Barclays, one thing that really struck me many years ago was Barclays made £3 billion for the year, and they sacked 300 people. And I thought, again, that's wrong. Don't misunderstand. I'm not making an excuse for it.
Yeah.
I'm just saying exactly what happens.
Well, listen, it's an absolutely fascinating book. I could talk to you both for hours. Sadly, we're going to have to leave it there, but genuinely, it's really fascinating to meet you both. So thank you both so much for coming in.
I'll sign one for you for 20 quid.
Thanks, James. It's been really great.
Keith Cheeseman and Clifford Thurlow there. Clifford Thurlow's book is called How to Rob the Bank of England. Keith Cheeseman reveals the true story of Britain's biggest ever robbery.